Hide and seek, it's supposed to be a game of laughter, whispers, and childhood memories. But sometimes, the ones hiding aren't your friends. Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying true stories where a simple game turned into a real-life nightmare. So turn off the lights, close your door, and if you hear footsteps behind you while listening, don't move. It might not be part of the game. I was 15 when it happened. It was a chilly Friday night in late September, the kind where you could feel autumn finally starting to settle in. My parents had gone out to dinner with some friends from work and told me they wouldn't be back until late. That meant I had the whole house to myself. I decided to invite my best friend and neighbor, Ethan, over. He was my age and lived right across Willow Lane. Normally, we'd hang out in my basement, play video games, or watch a movie. But that night we got bored pretty quickly. At some point, he suggested we play hide and seek. I laughed at first because it sounded childish, but we'd played it before with a group of friends, and it was surprisingly fun. My house wasn't very big, but there were plenty of places to hide, especially with the lights out. We switched most of them off, leaving only the kitchen light on, just to make it creepier. The rules were simple: no going outside and no hiding in the attic or crawl space. Everything else basement, bedrooms, closets, and under furniture was fair game. Ethan wanted to hide first, so I stood in the living room, covered my eyes, and started counting to 50. I could hear his footsteps for a few seconds before the house fell silent. When I finished counting, I shouted that I was coming to find him. I started my search in the kitchen since it was closest. There weren't many good spots to hide there, so I checked behind the basement door and then walked down the hallway. The bathroom empty. The front hall closet nothing. I made my way upstairs, the floorboards creaking with every step, and every tiny sound made me tense. I looked through my parents' bedroom first, peeking under the bed and behind the dresser, no sign of him. Next was my room. It was a bit messy, but not messy enough to hide anyone well. I still checked under the desk and in the closet, but again, nothing. That left the guest room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open. I pushed it slowly, half expecting Ethan to jump out and scare me, but the room was silent. I stepped inside, scanning the shadows. I bent down and looked under the bed empty. I opened the closet empty again. At that point, I figured he must have gone down to the basement. So I headed back downstairs and checked, behind the laundry machines, and in the little storage space under the stairs. Just when I was about to give up, I spotted him curled up behind some boxes. He laughed and asked how long it took me. I said, "Way too long." Then we switched. Now it was my turn to hide. Ethan covered his eyes and started counting. I went upstairs and crawled under the guest bed, pulling the bed skirt down so I was completely hidden. My heart was pounding as I lay there in the dark. A few minutes later, I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow, steady, heavy. He opened the bathroom door first, then my parents' room. The sounds moved down the hallway toward where I was. I could hear his breathing as he entered the guest room. He stopped near the bed. I held my breath. His shoes scuffed lightly against the carpet. Then silence. Long, unnerving silence. I braced myself, thinking he was about to grab the bed skirt and expose me, but he didn't. He walked out. I waited a few more minutes before crawling out, expecting him to be on the couch by then, but the living room was empty. I called out that the game was over. A voice answered from the basement, saying he was still down there looking for me. My stomach dropped. I thought he was joking. I went to the basement door, opened it, and yelled down the stairs. He yelled back, asking where I was hiding. That's when I felt my insides twist. I told him I was in the kitchen now, not hiding anymore. A few seconds later, Ethan came walking up the basement stairs, stepping into the light with a confused look on his face. He asked how I'd managed to get upstairs so fast. I told him I had been under the guest bed the whole time. He frowned and said he could have sworn he checked that room and that he heard someone moving in there, even breathing. I told him I hadn't moved a muscle. We argued for a second before laughing it off and deciding to play again, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every little creak made me jump. While I was counting during one round, I swore I heard a soft thud upstairs, but when I checked, nothing was there. I eventually found Ethan hiding in the laundry room. We played a few more rounds until we both got tired, then sat on the couch in the living room and turned the TV back on. That's when it happened. From upstairs came a loud thump like something heavy had fallen. Ethan asked if it might be my parents. I reminded him they were still out. The hair on my arms stood up. We both froze, staring toward the ceiling. After a moment, everything went silent again. Ethan said maybe something just slid off a shelf. I wanted to believe that. But then, we both heard it clearly, this time a slow, creaking sound of footsteps moving down the hallway upstairs. We locked eyes, neither of us daring to move. I whispered that maybe we should check it out. Ethan immediately shook his head, saying, "No way, but if someone had actually broken in, we couldn't just sit there." I told him to stay behind me and grabbed the fireplace poker beside the couch. We crept toward the stairs. The whole house was deathly quiet, so much that I could hear my own heartbeat. Each step we took groaned under our weight. When we reached the top, I pointed toward the guest room. The door was shut tight now. I knew for a fact I'd left it slightly open before. We stood frozen in place. Then, from behind that door, came a sound. A slow, dragging noise like fabric sliding across the carpet. Ethan whispered that we should just leave, but fear and curiosity kept me rooted there. My hands were shaking as I raised the poker and reached for the doorknob. I'm not exaggerating when I say my heart was pounding out of my chest. I swung the door open fast. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of the bed and dresser. No one there. The closet door stood half open. I stepped forward as Ethan lingered in the doorway. I pulled the closet door wide open, nothing but coats and boxes. We both let out uneasy laughs, pretending it was just our imagination. But right as we turned to leave, we heard another sound, this time from downstairs. The sound of the front door opening, then closing. We froze again. Ethan whispered that someone was inside the house. My stomach dropped. We bolted down the hall and crouched inside my bedroom, the lights off. I clutched the poker tightly. For a few seconds, it was silent. Then faint footsteps echoed from the first floor. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was still on the couch. I whispered that maybe we could sneak out through the window, but it was too small. The only way out was down the hall, past the stairs. The footsteps grew louder. Then we heard the basement door creak open, and the steps descend one by one. We both exhaled in shaky relief. Whoever it was had gone down there. That was our chance. We sprinted down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the yard. We didn't stop running until we reached Ethan's house across the street. His parents were home. When we told them what happened, they immediately called the police. The officers searched every corner of my house. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no one hiding, no open doors or windows. They said it was probably the house settling or our imagination running wild. But Ethan and I knew better. We both knew someone had been there. For weeks after that night, I couldn't sleep right. Every tiny creak made me think someone was walking down the hallway again. That was the last time I ever played hide and seek. We were too old for it anyway. Ethan and I never really talked about that night afterward, but every once in a while, we'd catch each other's eyes and know we were both thinking about it. The night hide and seek turned into something else. Even now, years later, I still remember it, all the sound of the closet door, the drag of something moving across the carpet, and those slow footsteps on the first floor. We never found out who it was. Maybe a burglar who panicked when they realized we were still home. Maybe someone who slipped out when we ran. All I know is that night taught me something terrifying, how it feels to realize you're not alone in your own house. I grew up in a neighborhood that bordered a long stretch of forest. The houses lined one side of the road, and behind them stretched nothing but trees for miles. When I was a kid, a bunch of us from the block used to hang out nearly every weekend. During the summer, we'd stay out late into the night, sometimes until our parents yelled for us to come home. One of our favorite games was hide and seek. We'd usually play across the backyards and into the edge of the woods. It was fun during the day, but once the sun went down, it felt different. The trees swallowed the light, and everything looked identical no matter where you turned. That's what made it scary, and that's what made it fun. The last time I ever played hide and seek in those woods, I was 14. It was a hot, humid August night. There were 5 of us, me, my friend Ryan, his younger brother Ben, and 2 kids from farther down the street, Leo and Caleb. We decided to play outside because it felt cooler then, sitting inside someone's basement. The rule was simple. You could hide anywhere in the yards or woods, but you had to stay close enough to hear the seeker when they called the round over. Leo volunteered to be it first. The rest of us scattered. I ran into the woods with Ryan, but we split up once we passed the first few trees. I crouched behind a fallen log, my heart pounding, even though it was just a game. I could hear Leo counting in the distance, his voice echoing faintly through the warm night air. When he finished, everything fell silent. Crickets chirped all around, and the wind rustled through the leaves. I stayed perfectly still. After a while, I heard footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. They were moving between the trees. I figured it was Leo. I held my breath and waited for him to pass. The steps stopped a few yards from where I was hiding. Whoever it was just stood there. I waited for them to call out or move again, but they didn't. My skin crawled. I almost whispered to ask who it was, but remembered the rules. If I gave myself away, I'd lose, so I stayed silent. Finally, the footsteps started again, moving deeper into the woods. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. I peeked over the log, but it was too dark to see far. The moonlight only touched the tops of the trees. I stayed put for another few minutes before getting tired of waiting. I crawled out and began creeping back toward the houses. As I walked, I heard Leo calling that the round was over and everyone should come out. I hurried back and saw the others already gathered in the yard. Leo had found Ryan and Caleb, but not me or Ben. A minute later, Ben came running out of the woods, covered in dirt and grinning. He said nobody would have found him. I told them I'd been behind the log and almost got caught when Leo passed right by me, but Leo frowned. He said he never went that far into the woods. He said he'd only circled near the first row of trees and found Ryan crouched near a fence. I frowned back, confused, and asked who it was I had heard walking past me, but everyone just shrugged. We laughed it off and kept playing. The next round, it was my turn to be the seeker. I counted loudly against a tree while the others ran off. When I finished, I searched the yards first. I found Caleb hiding behind a shed and Ryan crouched in the bushes. Then I went into the woods to look for Leo, and Ben, the forest was quiet except for the hum of bugs. My flashlight beam swung across the trunks as I listened carefully for any movement. After a while, I spotted Ben crouched beside a large oak. I shouted that I'd found him, and he laughed as he ran back to the yard. That left Leo. I went deeper in, calling out that I was coming. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps. Slow, heavy steps moving through the dark, just ahead of me. I pointed my flashlight that way, but the trees were too dense to see much. I walked carefully, trying not to make a sound. The steps stopped again. Now I'll admit, I was getting nervous. Then I heard Leo yell from behind me that the round was over. I spun around. He was already walking back toward the houses. My stomach sank. I asked if he had just been in front of me. He said no, he'd been hiding near the fence the whole time. My heart started pounding again. Twice now, I'd heard someone walking out there who wasn't one of us. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the footsteps were too heavy, too slow to be a raccoon or a deer. We played a few more rounds, but every time I hid, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was out there. Every rustle in the leaves made me flinch. I heard twigs snap, faint crunching sounds in the darkness. Once, I even thought I saw a shape move between the trees, but when I aimed my flashlight, it was gone. The others didn't notice anything strange. They just kept laughing and running around. I tried to act normal, but that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The final round of the night, Leo decided to hide in the woods again. We all split up like before. I didn't want to go too far, so I stayed near the edge of the trees, crouched low in the tall grass. I could see the soft glow of the porch lights through the branches. I heard Leo counting somewhere off in the distance. When he finished, silence returned. After a few minutes, something made my blood run cold. I heard whispering. A soft voice, too low to understand, but close too close. My body tensed. I peeked over the grass, but the woods looked empty. The whispering stopped. A few seconds later, I heard the footsteps again. They moved past me and deeper into the trees. I stayed frozen where I was until Leo called out that the game was over. Everyone came back laughing and brushing off dirt. I walked slowly to join them, my heart still pounding. I told them I'd heard someone whispering, but they just laughed and said I was trying to scare them. I didn't argue, but deep down, I knew what I'd heard. We sat in Ryan's yard after that, drinking sodas and talking. That's when Ben suddenly asked if anyone else had seen the man. We all went quiet and looked at him. He said that while he was hiding, he'd seen a tall man standing in the woods. The figure hadn't moved, just stood there watching. Leo told him he was imagining things. Caleb laughed it off, but my stomach turned because I believed him. We ended the night soon after, and everyone went home. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept hearing that whisper in my head, the slow crunch of footsteps in the leaves. I never played hide and seek in those woods again. Even now, years later, whenever I hear leaves crunching in the dark, I think about that night. I think about the man Ben said he saw. I think about the footsteps that weren't, Leo's, and the whispering I still can't explain. Maybe it was a stranger passing through. Maybe it was someone who lived out there. All I know is that when you hide in dark woods, you never really know who else is hiding with you. It was a scorching Saturday afternoon last August. I was 14 then, living out in the countryside of West Virginia. My backyard stretches endlessly, acres of open grass, scattered trees, and an old weathered tool shed sitting near the far edge. My friends and I practically lived out there every summer. That day, it was me, Eli, Marcus, and Dylan. We were goofing around, playing basketball on the hoop my dad had bolted near the driveway. After about an hour, we were exhausted, sitting in the grass, drenched in sweat, chugging down water bottles. That's when we noticed a kid we didn't recognize walking up from the dusty road that cuts past my house. He looked around 16, older and taller than any of us. His messy brown hair stuck out, and he wore a faded gray t-shirt and jeans despite the blazing heat. We all stopped talking when he got close. He walked right up to us like we were old friends. He asked if we wanted to even out the teams and make it 3-on-3. None of us said anything right away. Finally, Dylan asked who he was. The kid said his name was Tyler. He claimed he lived just up the road and had been walking through the woods when he saw us. We exchanged confused looks. I'd lived here my whole life and had never seen this kid once. Neither had my friends. But he seemed normal enough, casual, confident. Eli asked if he wanted to play basketball. Tyler shook his head and suggested something else, a game of manhunt. He said my backyard was perfect for it, since there were tons of hiding spots. At the time, none of us thought much about that comment. But looking back, that should have been a red flag. How would he know anything about my property? Still, we all agreed. It sounded more fun than sweating in the heat. We split into 2 teams. Tyler immediately volunteered to be on the hunting team. He said he loved being the seeker. So it was Tyler, Dylan, and Marcus hunting, and me, Eli, and Ben hiding. Dylan kicked a soccer ball to start the countdown. We scattered. The hunters covered their eyes and started counting. Eli sprinted toward the tree line. Ben darted around the garage, and I decided not to go into the woods yet. Instead, I ran to the shed. The place always smelled like gasoline and damp wood. I spotted a pile of folded tarps in the corner and slid under one, lying perfectly still. 10 minutes passed, or what felt like forever. Nobody came. I started thinking maybe they'd given up. Then the shed door creaked open. In a single motion, the tarp was ripped off me. I blinked up into Dylan's grinning face. I guess it was too obvious a hiding spot. We walked back to the patio together. A few minutes later, Ben showed up too, caught. Then Marcus and Eli came strolling back. We stood around catching our breath, drinking more water. But Tyler wasn't there. At first, nobody said anything. Then Marcus asked where Tyler had gone. None of us knew. We waited 10 more minutes, expecting him to stroll up from the woods, but he never did. Dylan shrugged and said maybe the guy was just some weird kid who got bored and left. We all agreed, even though it felt strange that he'd disappear without a word. When the others left around sunset, I went inside. That's when I noticed something odd near my bedroom window, a piece of rope, lying in the grass. It was weathered and dirty, like it had been out there for ages, but I knew it hadn't been there earlier. I picked it up, tossed it aside, but it stuck in my head. The first thought I had was Tyler. I told myself I was overthinking. Later that evening, though, I couldn't shake the feeling. What if he'd gone inside the house when we weren't paying attention? My dad usually left one of the side doors unlocked during the day. I went room to room, checking closets and under beds. Nothing. That night, around 11 o'clock, I was lying in bed, scrolling my phone. An hour passed, and then I heard it. Soft footsteps outside my door. I froze. My dad sometimes gets up at night, but he always coughs or clears his throat. This was silent, too silent. I called out for him. No answer. My pulse was pounding. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I got up slowly and locked it. I stood there staring at the handle, waiting. 30 seconds passed. Then I heard the front door close. The sound echoed through the whole house. I didn't hesitate. I bolted to my dad's room and shook him awake. He gradually sat up while I explained everything. He didn't question me. He grabbed the shotgun from under his bed and told me to stay close. We searched the whole house, every closet, the basement, even the garage. Then he went outside, sweeping the flashlight across the yard and trees. Nothing, no sign of anyone. After that, we locked every window and door tight. The next day, I told my friends what happened. They laughed it off, saying Tyler was probably just some random weirdo passing through. But Eli admitted he'd found Tyler a little off too. He said the guy barely talked during the game, just kept staring at people. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., a scratching sound jolted me awake. It was coming from my bedroom window. Slow, steady, like someone dragging a nail or a stick across the glass. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I bent one of the blinds just enough to peek through. There was a figure standing outside. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of someone tall and still, inches from the glass. I jumped back, screaming for my dad. I ran into the hallway shouting until he came out of his room. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the shotgun and ran outside, firing 2 warning shots into the air. I heard him yelling, threatening to shoot whoever was out there if they came back. The figure was gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. I stayed up in the living room with every light on while my dad stayed up too. In the morning, he told me he was sure Tyler had been the one messing with us. He said if that kid ever showed up again, he'd regret it. My dad wasn't entirely serious. That's just how he talks, but I could tell he meant it. He said that boy wasn't welcome anywhere near our home again. As far as I know, Tyler never came back. But sometimes, when I'm outside at night, I still think about that rope by my window. And I can't help but wonder what he planned to do if I hadn't woken up when I did.